I would also like to greet this meeting, and I'm happy to see familiar faces. And also I would like to start by saying that we are going to do this work on best practices, of course, with relying on very extensive communication with all of you. I would like to start with a little bit of background of this initiative and say, first of all, that the Decade Declaration stipulates reviewing of experiences. So the Decade was created, among other things, to provide a unique platform for countries to learn and exchange experiences in the inclusion of Roma. This means to communicate on the developments and provide assessments of what works and what doesn't work for Roma integration. The International Steering Committee meetings and other Decade events have provided to a certain extent for this purpose, but not in a systematic manner. There have been similar initiatives in the past to provide some kind of assessment, some kind of measuring of progress, and more systematic attempts have been made to assess the actions and results on policy levels. And this is including the progress reporting that we have established last year, and we are hearing now from governments on this meeting how they are progressing with the implementation of the Decade. Another good example is the Decade Watch that was mentioned by Mr. Balic, and that was discontinued, but also provided very good assessment of the Decade as a policy for Roma inclusion. Also, there have been attempts to measure the situation of Roma, and primarily here I'm referring to the UNDP, United Nations Development Programme research at the early stages of the Decade, when the report on vulnerable groups, particularly Roma, have been produced to serve as a baseline for monitoring of the progress of the data. And also sporadic and partial attempts have been made to collect data on project level, including those provided by donors on projects they have supported, such as the database of projects of Roma Education Fund, the MTM, or Making the Most of the EU funds for Roma, and so on. But there is no existing comprehensive repository of projects implemented under the Decade, and even less so cross-cutting assessment on the underlying factors for successes and failures of such projects to meet the objectives of the Decade. So recognizing this responsibility to assist the Presidency in such efforts, the Secretariat has made an attempt to systematically collect data on projects even before. Maybe you recall the attempt of Tunde and Adem to circulate a questionnaire and collect the data from you on best practices you are aware about. They also visited the countries and had interviews with you. Unfortunately, because of lack of time and lack of staff, the Decade Secretariat was not sufficiently capacitated to further this work and to provide really comprehensive knowledge base that could be used from the Decade, by the Decade partners and also other Roma integration actors. So recently we have started this project that we are calling Decade Intelligence, and it has been initiated to actually fill this gap. So it is envisaged to collect data on projects, create and maintain repository of such projects, and also to cross-assess the projects for factors of successes and failures, or what has been working and what has not been working so successfully in order to reach the objectives of the Decade. The project is implemented by the Decade Secretariat and with the generous support of the UNDP and also the Open Society Foundations. I have both the honor and responsibility to work on the project, and to this end I would like to encourage you to communicate with me regarding this project for any questions and comments you might have. So far, the methodology for collecting and analyzing the data has been more or less completed, and consultants to collect and analyze data in each of the Decade countries have been identified, and many of them are here today. We are also seeking experts to assist us with creation of a digital database that would be accessible through the internet, so the data would be in your disposal and at any time for consultation. And after this meeting, we are going to have a meeting with consultants very soon. This would be orientational meeting when we are going to actually start the process of collecting the data. The consultants will work on field in their countries to map, first of all, the stakeholders of the decade in each participating country, and they will also map as many projects as possible that were implemented under the decade. I would not go into details of what makes a project under the decade. We are all aware that flagging a project with the decade flag is not very easy because, I mean, it was not that strict. However, we have developed the methodology in a sense to see what have been, to identify which projects can be classified, let's say, as decade projects. But still, this is a complex issue, and we can open discussion on that. Based on the indicators closely related to the essential principles of the decade, we are going to identify 5 potential practices in each country that are pointing out to the most significant successes on one hand, but also challenges on the other hand in the Roma integration process. With the assistance of the in-country consultants, we are going to look at these practices more closely by having, although not thorough as usually project evaluations are done, but we are still going to have comparable common evaluation intended to provide us with insights of what has been working and what has not been working for the Roma within the Roma decade, or to achieve the objective of the decade. The information will be used to produce a report exactly to guide the decade and other Roma inclusion stakeholders in their work, pointing out to the most important factors that they have to consider when working on Roma integration. So, as said, the research is intended to look at the most successful Roma inclusion practices throughout the decade countries, but also the challenges. So, at this point, it is important to highlight that this work is not intended to finger point to actors, to criticize them or to make them look bad, let's say, or even not to prize them, but the main purpose is actually to learn and use the generated knowledge. Furthermore, the principles of the decade, including efforts of government, participation of Roma in the whole process, in the whole cycle, mainstreaming cross-cutting topics, measuring progress, reducing the gap between Roma and the rest of the society, and so on, are the indicators that we are going to look at. So these are our criteria to see whether something has been successful or not. It doesn't mean that filtering the practices through other criteria, through other indicators, will not point these practices as successful practices. So Roma-related projects will be reviewed from the perspective of the decade objectives. Thus, certain policies that have otherwise been successful will not necessarily be considered as such within the decade intelligence because of the specific indicators. After the work is completed, the Secretariat will try to continue both to update the database and to provide relevant information and advice based on the gained knowledge for the Roma inclusion actors. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce this project at this particular moment because it's very important as an attempt to establish key relationships with the decade partners who are at the same time the main information sources and beneficiaries of the projects. I would like to invite you to cooperate with the in-country consultants and our office, providing the valuable information on your work so far within the decade, bearing in mind that it is done for your benefit and you will be the one who will use it. Thank you.